The fear and hunger wave has come and gone. Its largest creators onto bigger and better things, whilst those with lingering interest flounder on the content beaches, watching scavengers like myself pick at the carcass of this behemoth as we greedily eye up the indies that dance in the distant algorithm. Yet, as I reflect back on the oceanic landscape from which this movement spawned, I feel myself drawn to a sinister secret singing in the depths, a singular question on my mind. What's up with all the bugs? Not the glitches, the bugs, the insects, the little creepy crawlies scurrying around on the peripherals of both titles in the series. What's their deal? For all the lore deep dives and theory videos I've seen on this series, very few have shone any light on these darkness dwellers, which is odd as of all the non-human enemy types in games, they feature perhaps the most heavily in iconography across the series. They have a multi-century spanning history, with established monarchic systems and overlap with ancient deities, and they feature heavily in both active gameplay and lore books. They also have their own motives and desires that run parallel to the greater narrative. Luckily for you, I have a lukewarm interest in entomology. I've also been told I give off bug trainer energy, so I feel well poised to explain the meaning behind the insects in Fear and Hunger, or at least my interpretation of it. In this exploration, let's look at every insectoid creature throughout the series and see if we can untangle this web of symbolism. If you enjoy, subscribe because that's good for my ego, and as always, thank you to the members. There's also a community Discord now if you want to come discuss Fear and Hunger with other people. Most of us are familiar with this series by this point, but to very briefly explain it, Fear and Hunger as a setting is largely a loose fantastical adaptation of our own world, roughly the same cultures and broad strokes time periods, as well as similar major world events. But on the periphery of society, things become somewhere between Alice in Wonderland and Berserk. Across two titles, these games follow ensemble casts as they fall into the strangest and most dangerous parts of this fantasy world, where ancient gods hold sway and monsters roam. The titular dungeons of Fear and Hunger are the setting for the first game. They are described by a council of gods as a nexus point that pulls places from across dimensions. These dungeons have no set location or real coherent theme. Instead, they are simply a sprawling and ever-changing maze of darkness. This is a setting that exists outside of conventional ideas of time and distance, simultaneously ancient and modern, near and far. This is due to the influence of the God of the Depths, an ancient god who effectively is the dungeon. Their mouth and hearts can be found throughout the labyrinth, and the Gauntlet, a location heavily tied to two of the game's endings, is the innards of this near-dead god accessed through their mouth. This ancient deity acts as both an active player in the plot and as the setting, as well as being a plot device that facilitates one of the game's endings. As with all the older gods in Fear and Hunger, Depths represents a series of concepts made manifest. Primarily they seem to represent darkness, forgotten places, and all things that dwell there. Cave dwellers, vermin, and of course insects. The God of the Depths is difficult to understand as there isn't that much about them in the game that directly addresses them. A major source of lore, being the Dark Priests, don't seem to know much about Depths at all, only one mentions them by name. The priests have specific dialogue only about Ulmer, Sylvian and Grogoroth. They also carry tomes relevant to those gods. Valtiel, a senior Dark Priest, doesn't ever ask about the God of the Depths, and the first Dark Priest to ever really write about Depths is Enki, who has a unique relationship with this being due to spending most of his childhood down a well eating bugs. So to understand this being, we need to look a lot at the implied connections in game and what the followers of this deity teach us about the values and ideas that this being embodies. Fear and Hunger is a game about transformation. This is a recurrent theme across both entries, and the nature of transformations on display teaches us a lot about the old gods in this universe. Moonscorching in Termina teaches us a lot about Rare, whilst Marriages teach us a lot about Sylvian, for instance. The monsters are, for the most part, transformed humans. Several of the endings are about shedding your human form and becoming something beyond that. This game's title is a reference to the god of fear and hunger, a being created from a little girl that survives the darkness of the dungeons. This dungeon is both a corpse and a cocoon, a macabre hub for renewal and rebirth, and this theme is only accentuated by the insects. Over the course of the game, we see a metamorphosis, a merging of the concepts represented by depths into the body of a young girl who represents an evolution of the fear of the unknown into a more modern and understandable fear. To best understand the nature of the god of the depths, the god of fear and hunger, and of divinity itself, we can look at the only commonality found in all of the locations pulled from to create the dungeon: insects. Everywhere in this game, the dungeon, the courtyard, the thicket, the blood pit, the caves, the ancient city, and the gauntlet, all of these locations are home to creepy crawlies. This makes sense as the god of the depths is a deity heavily tied to insects. Affinity with this god is raised through interactions with cockroaches. Many of the spells tied to them are about influencing insects. Transformations caused by the god's influence are often insectoid in nature, such as that seen with the butterfly, the scarabs, the beekeepers, and other six-armed oddities like the body snatchers and the harvestmen. In the case of the harvestmen, the reference image, a painting by Kurt Cobain, only has 4 limbs, so there was an intentional choice here to add another 2 to make them more insectoid. A lot of coverage of Fear and Hunger fixates on how dark and unforgiving this setting is, but this is offset for someone who raises affinity with the god of the depths. Insects will give you useful items, they'll guide you, they will choose not to fight or harm you in endgame areas like the ancient city of Mahab or even the Gauntlet. To be a friend to insects is to be a friend to the dungeon. Across this series there's a focus on 4 major insects: beetles, cockroaches, butterflies, and bees. Each of these creatures has heavy symbolic relevance to the events of the game, and their inclusion can help us understand what exactly happens to the god of the depths between the 2 games. Let's look at all of these little critters individually before making a bigger point about what all the bugs mean. Before going any further, I just wanted to say this is where I'd add in a raid sponsorship and make jokes about raid bug spray. Just know what you missed out on by not sending me millions of dollars, Plarium.
Men are wicked. Condensed wickedness can manifest in many ways. Scarabs are there to remind us of this.
This quote from the Hall of the New Gods is further proof of the connection between man and insect within this setting. Scarabs are likely wicked men who have become insects. Failing that, their destructive and explosive acid attack is at least symbolic of the darkness within men, but given the human to insect transformations that are present in this game, as well as the humanoid faces of the Scarabs, there is a high likelihood that these were once human. The fact that to understand them, one must have a level of affinity with the god of the depths implies that this deity had a hand in their change. Or at least is someone they venerate, given their current insectoid nature. In spite of their prior humanity, they have developed their own civilization and history with a distinctly insectoid identity. They inhabit the Mahab of the past, the ancient city, and even in this bygone age, they claim to have come from a time before. Quote,
"This city, it's our home. It has been since the beginning."
The Scarabs also claim to have taken this city from a race which they called the Spiderlings, implying a wider insectoid society that existed in and around the ancient city with diverging civilizations and full-scale wars. I know, spiders aren't insects. I do know that. Stop writing that comment, I know. Though Scarabs have diminished in the present, dialogue with Sir Seymour implies they do continue to exist and live within the city of Mahab in the present day. So we have an ancient civilization of wicked humans who have transformed into an insectoid culture and continue to flourish within the domain of the god of the depths. Interestingly, to the Scarabs, all that one needs to do to qualify as an insect is to speak their language. Quote,
"Oh, you talk our language, master? Let us call it a truce. We insect-like need to pull the same rope."
Such dialogue serves only to further blend the line between man and insect within the confines of the dungeon. The name Scarab is interesting. It brings to mind the sacred scarab, or dung beetle of ancient Egyptian folklore and Hollow Knight boss fame, which was believed to be an entirely male race that could create young without females. This led to Scarabs coming to represent ideas of renewal, rebirth, and transformation. The hieroglyphic symbol of a beetle can be translated as to transform or to become. This connection was later strengthened by works like Kafka's Metamorphoses, wherein the man-turned-bug Gregor is called an old dung beetle.
Yeah. Totally Kafkaesque.
The scarab was a part of the funerary cult of ancient Egypt, with stone heart scarabs being placed upon the chest of the deceased to perform spells which would see them attain a positive afterlife. These heart scarabs were said to silence a wicked heart when it was to be judged, preventing it from speaking ill of its owner. Refer back to the New Gods comment on scarabs. They remind us that men are wicked. Some have argued that heart scarabs were components in transformation or resurrection spells, as seems to be the case with this gilded heart scarab currently residing in the Art Institute of Chicago. The reasoning for this association is their connection with the beetle god Khepri, god of the morning sun, a divine symbol of transformation. Wearing beetle necklaces or rings was said to ensure resurrection as they would draw power from Khepri. Khepri is also just very funny looking. I understand why in Smite they turned him into a big beetle, because just slapping a beetle on a human head is not quite as effective as like a dog or a crocodile. It looks kinda silly. The Scarabs existing within the City of the Gods and having links to transformation serves as foreshadowing for the ascendancy to godhood that one can attain within the City of Scarabs. However, this is a false ascendancy, so too are these false Scarabs. They have much more in common with acid-shooting bombardier beetles, which aren't Scarabs at all. Nevertheless, from the very first civilization we know the God of the Depths had a hand in creating and nurturing, there is already a commitment to change and transformation being a theme the game wants to highlight. Mojave is the location of one of the God of the Depths' hearts, and around this area of strong influence the insects flourish. If heart scarabs are a symbol of transformation, then the God of the Depths has heart scarabs in spades, an entire civilization of them built around this heart. The God of the Depths offers up their own body as a nest to nurture these insects which were once men. But what about that other ancient civilization mentioned? What about the spiderlings? Well, there isn't that much to say about spiderlings. The existence of a spider society inside the Temple of Torment indicates that the Scarabs aren't lying and spiders did live in Mojave, which just makes them more believable overall. Also, the spiders know who David and Goliath are, which implies they follow some kind of Abrahamic faith, which is insane in terms of lore implications, but I don't think Miro thought it through that much. Assuming the Scarabs are truthful about everything and they have no reason to lie, then sure, they've been in Mojave since the beginning. They're an ancient race built around the heart of the God of the Depths. But in Fear and Hunger, no culture is entirely homogeneous and their beliefs and traditions change. As with the lizard men of the caves, whilst these Scarabs likely have ties to the old gods, they also potentially have newer beliefs that shine even more light on their role within this story. Let us return to the words of the new gods.
Men are wicked. Condensed wickedness can manifest in many ways. Scarabs are there to remind us of this.
Turkilo the Beetle Man is a pretty obscure character in Fear and Hunger, mentioned exclusively in the Tale of the Pocket Cat from Termina. Turkilo is a tall humanoid beetle, described as being tall, round, and wearing something resembling a gas mask. Within this story, Turkilo is a companion of the young boy Willem, who they have conscripted to help them save their ancient kingdom. Presumably the Scarab Society of Mojave, but there might be other beetle societies and we just don't know about them. On top of that, in Miro's art, Turkilo doesn't look that much like the Scarabs, but his face is hidden and this is art depicting a fairy tale, so things might be abstracted. Willem and Turkilo don't get very far before Willem enrages Turkilo with his inability to keep up with him, and Turkilo forces the young boy Willem to look upon a gruesome sight. The excerpt is as follows. In the middle of that opening, two giant-faced baby worms were caught in a wrestling match. They bit each other, clawed each other, all while crying and wallowing loudly. Turkilo yelled from above that this is the nature of men. That just like those song thrush tricks from earlier, this would be Willem's future once he grew up to be an adult. Humans were ruthless in their pursuit for riches and wealth. Did Willem really want to take part in such fierce competition? While the two talked, the other, the more ugly-faced blind worm had bested the other. Hungry for more devastation, the thing set its eyes on Willem. It gave Willem a desperate chase. Turkilo just flew away cackling.
This is what you wanted, right?
Willem ran to a nearby thicket in hopes that the blind worm couldn't fit in there. Instead, the beast thrusted itself past broken branches with ferocious force. Fat from eating his other baby-faced blind worm sibling, one particularly sharp branch punctured the belly of the beast, and from within hundreds of small blind worm babies spilled out all over the place. The little worms started wrestling and devouring each other the moment they landed on the ground. Willem realizes this is how the giant baby-faced blind worms got so big to begin with. They kept eating each other until only one remained. From this, we understand that whilst Turkilo and wider insectoid society were willing to turn to humans to help them, they hold a distaste for humanity. Slow worms are darkness-dwelling creatures known for being pretty pathetic. also called blindworms and death adders. A commonality in their iconography is the lack of a major sense, though all these names are slight misnomers. Slowworms are able to sacrifice part of themselves, a tail, to survive, and their mating is a violent affair. To compare humanity to them is to paint humanity as cruel, blind, and stupid, existing only for bloody mating rituals. This comparison serves to draw a distinct problem with humans that is felt by the most ardent followers of the God of the Depths. Humans are believed to be too selfish, too crass, to live up to any kind of greater potential expected of them. Turkilo reaches out to Willem, but ultimately sees him as no more useful than the slowworm and abandons him. This distaste for humanity makes sense when we look at the behaviour of the insects in game. Many of them are interested in the greater advancement of their conditions across the board, and they all seem to congregate in groups. To the Scarabs, fighting with anyone they consider to be an insect, even just someone who speaks their language, is bizarre. What we have here is a clear motive for the insects, to further the conditions of their own whilst maintaining a general distaste for humanity who they view as backwards. Insects are largely defined by serving the greater good rather than individual interests. However, with Turkilo we also understand more of what the God of the Depths is. If Turkilo is a part of the Beetle Society of Mahav, or really any of the locations inside the dungeon, then his name is interesting. Turkilo is a Finnish term which can be used to refer to Nycrophorus beetles, which belong to the carrion beetle family. These beetles colonize carcasses, and the larger the carcass, the larger the beetle society. Therefore it makes sense that the largest carcass, the carcass of a god, would host the largest and most sacred beetle society. We see here that the God of the Depths, even if not entirely dead, offers up their body as carrion within which to gestate followers. This, alongside the offering of their body to followers like the Scarabs who reside around the heart and the cockroaches who live within the gauntlet and the thicket, shows that Depths is willing to offer up parts of their physical form as part of the creation of something else. Insects needing to inhabit carrion is also shown within the blood pit, where the insects comment that they need fresh blood to grow. It's for this reason that I believe the creation of the God of Fear and Hunger was not a surprise, but rather something that Depths would want to happen. But to understand why, let's breeze past this massive accusation and come back to it later, after looking at some roaches. I'm going to repeat a lot of words in this segment no matter how many thesauruses I try, so if you want you can drink every time I say Depths, Fear and Hunger, Cockroach, or Butterfly, and it won't be fun for you. The Cockroach King is the most devout follower of the God of the Depths, being one of the only ways in game to raise affinity with this deity. His kingdom is located within the thicket, which is said to be a tree spawned from a human bride of the old god, making the cockroaches thematic children of sorts. Similar to the Scarabs, they inhabit a region around a heart of their patron deity, further cementing their link. The cockroaches are the most direct link to Depths, however their diverging storylines also showcase Depths as a god of change. Thematically, the cockroach's association with surviving situations that would otherwise kill most living beings is closely tied to Depths, who simultaneously dies and is still alive well into the future. However, though the two are closely linked, there is divergence in these motives. The Cockroach King is an interactable NPC with a quest chain that involves killing people for him to gain affinity with the God of the Depths. The first individual is the Butterfly, a wretched being who wishes to transform into a butterfly. This is an outcome that the Cockroach King believes would be bad for reasons we'll go into later, but first let's talk about the Butterfly. Of the Butterfly, the new gods say,
"The poor creature wants to get the gift of the God of the Depths. He was once persuaded by the king of the insects. Needless to say that his pursuits are in vain."
This is not true. Even prior to the player interfering at all, the butterfly had begun to undergo a metamorphosis, sporting an elongated proboscis and small wings. And the fact that he has dealings with the Cockroach King indicates that he already spoke the language of the insects and had some affinity with Depths. On top of this, upon his transformation he leaves behind a butterfly soul. Souls are predetermined parts of beings that are set at birth, as is shown in the intro when every character is introduced with "you were born with the soul of the blank," implying that this creature's fate was always to seek out this transformation. They have always had the soul of a butterfly. We see soul types influence character decisions across the series, and this is no exception. We also never see a soul type change. So, if the butterfly is a unique being with a unique soul type that was born for the specific purpose of coming to the dungeons and transforming, what does this all mean? Well, the appearance of the butterfly is not unique to the first game. Throughout Termina, the iconography of the butterfly is used to herald the birth of the new god Logic, with butterflies appearing throughout the game. Butterflies are famously associated with transformation as a result of their life cycle. From Kendrick Lamar to Until Dawn, this is a pop culture and media staple with a heavy mythological background. However, butterflies also represent death, as is seen in their mythological connection to Thanatos, Greek god of death, as well as other connections such as the arrival of monarch butterflies on the Mexican Dia de los Muertos celebration. In Fear and Hunger, the symbolism seems to be both simultaneously. Butterflies arrive as heralds to celebrate simultaneous death and transformation of older gods. Depths and Venushka die, and then are thematically reborn as Fear and Hunger and Logic. To use the term death here is not quite correct, as prominent occult writers Enki and Donovan Hugo note that old gods cannot die. To quote the God Manifesto, a law book written by Hugo, "How do you kill an idea, an inspiration or one of the primordial concepts once it is conceived? The thought will forever haunt your mind as long as our consciousness is there to remind us of it. Once an older god is born, it has existed forever. A god, like a human soul, is not constrained by linear time and space. It can reincarnate multiple times within our history and future history without us knowing any better. They spawn from the green stream, but which spawns first? An older god in its physical form, or the concept our consciousness gave birth to? Whilst it is true that an idea cannot die, it can transform. Our understanding of a great many things now is so far removed from our original understanding that they may as well be entirely fresh concepts. So it is that the butterfly arrives at the end of each age to usher in a change in mentality, be it the transition from the Dark Age to the Cruel Age, or the Cruel Age to the Age of Logic. The butterfly is a herald of transformative death, a transition of power to a new form that better represents an idea as it shifts. The new gods thought that the butterfly could never transform because they were limited by the perceptions of their respective ages. For the same reason they can't answer questions about logic, but they can answer questions about things in Termina, such as the Termina festival itself. This theory of transformative death is further proven when you look at exactly what the ascended gods born in both games represent, which are greatly tied to the gods they siphon power from. Fear and Hunger sees mankind move away from a fear of the unknown to a more tangible fear of hunger, poverty, and warfare. Similarly, Logic inverts the runic symbol of Venushka to showcase a move away from nature being something removed from mankind to becoming something to be harnessed and exploited for the furthering of humanity. Depths likely knew that this would happen to them. Outside of their thematic connections to transformation, as are seen through the butterfly, the scarabs, and basically every monster in the dungeon like the crow mauler and the guards, there's also the concept of the Jubilee. Upon entering the gauntlet, a player with mastery over insects will find the insectoid followers of Depths rejoicing over a coming Jubilee, which is a really interesting word to use. A Jubilee is an event commemorating an anniversary, or in biblical terms, a period of remission or universal pardon. In Roman Catholic tradition, a Jubilee is a year of forgiveness of sins and repairing relationships with adversaries. There's a similar connotation in Judaism. These followers of Depths are aware of what is to come and openly celebrate it. The ascendancy of Fear and Hunger is said in-game to be a plan of the new god Nilvan hoping to create light for humanity, but the girl was raised in pure darkness, born and living entirely within the body of the god of the Depths, similar to his other thematic children, the Scarabs and the cockroaches. To return to the concepts posed by Turkilo, Depths already has ties to raising creatures inside of their own cadaver, and the girl fits this to a T, said to have been raised in pure darkness, which throughout the game is a term that is synonymous with the god of the Depths' influence. Depths is said by Ragnarvalda to be the patron deity of forsaken creatures, which humanity is in this setting due to their abandonment by the old gods. Therefore, Depths taking pity on forsaken creatures creates a being to drive mankind forward, not as a guiding light but as a motivating fear. The Jubilee is Depths' forgiveness of mankind, or the celebration of ushering in a new era, not abandoning them as his fellow old gods have, instead looking to do an act of mercy which ushers in the end of a dark age. This theory is further cemented by the runic symbol for the god of Fear and Hunger being a Manaz rune. the Elder Futhark rune used to depict mankind. Cleverly, it's also an inversion of the rune of the god of the depths, showcasing Depths' involvement with mankind. Fear and Hunger is a true god for humanity, even more so than Ulmer. On top of this, Depths' affinity for mankind is shown in their presentation, being rooted deep within the earth whilst all the other old gods have left the mortal realm. Depths is very involved with humans. In this sense, Depths does not die, but rather takes pity on the forsaken humanity of the setting, allowing themselves to morph into something that will better advance humanity. It is, after all, the god of fear and hunger that brings humanity into the Cruel Age. This is premeditated, as is shown through the celebration of the Jubilee, as well as the butterfly and the heart scarabs. All signs point to this transformation being something that felt inevitable and people knew about, long before it happened. But this is not a complete relinquishing of power. We'll discuss that when we get to the beekeepers though. For now, the question remains, if the butterfly exists to herald in a new era, alongside a celebration acknowledged by followers of the god of the depths, then why does the Cockroach King want to kill him? Well, the Cockroach King is generally afraid of changing eras. His other target is Enki, who is called a luminary of a new epoch by the new gods. He targets exclusively those with great capacity for change. On top of this, the shifting power to fear and hunger sees Depths showing affinity for humanity, who we learn through Turkilo are viewed as barbarous by insects, a sentiment the Cockroach King very much shares. Though the cockroaches are the symbolic children of Depths, they are also representative of stagnation. In the Indian Vastu, a form of architectural philosophy, the presence of cockroaches is a sign of stagnation which can lead to negative energies. This belief is embodied by the highly stagnant Cockroach King, who looks to seek out and kill anyone who might pose a threat to the status quo that sees him maintaining power. He's still able to give out power on behalf of Depths, but the two are not completely aligned, in the same way that one can gain affinity with Grogoroth by joining the wolf masks, but Grogoroth probably doesn't know who the wolf masks are. To summarise, through the events seen in game, it's safe to assume that the birth of the god of fear and hunger and the seeming death of the god of the depths was not the result of Depths being swindled by the new god Nilvan or Lagarde, but rather a premeditated event with heralds, predefined soul types, celebration, and a definitive end goal in line with the god of the depths' affinity for forsaken creatures and transformation. However, though Depths is said to experience a death in this instance, this is not the case, as is shown through the beekeepers. In Termina, there are still traces of followers of Depths, showcasing this god not only still exists, but is still known in some parts of the world and still has influence. This is shown through the beekeepers. Just to further cement Depths as being a god representing change and transformation, bees are symbolic of this. Interestingly, they're also associated with new birth arising from death, as is seen in the myth of Aristeas, who sacrificed 4 bulls and 4 cows, and from their rotting corpses spawned new bees to fill his hives. This further links Depths with birth from corpses, and thus to the birth of fear and hunger, as well as all the other stuff we've already talked about. The beekeepers serve as a good roundup to this theory, and bring together all the disparate threads to better understand Depths' plan for humanity. As stated before, Fear and Hunger is a game about transformation, and old gods exercising the power of transformation to impart their ideals upon humanity. Whilst there are beings like Rare who dislike humanity, Depths seems to exhibit something closer to pity. As is evidenced through insects like Turkilo and the Cockroach King, humanity is viewed as being barbaric and unworthy of this attention, but Depths gives it anyway, being an entity who pities the forsaken and downtrodden. So it is that Depths raises the girl to be their successor, offering up their own body and imparting the rune of mankind to showcase that man is capable of change. Depths is a god of change, and all this change is in service of creating a more homogeneous society, more insectoid society. This is not entirely benevolent, however, as this homogeneity is motivated by fear and is closer to a hive mind than to a utopia. The notion of Depths looking to create a hive mind out of humanity is explored through the Mumblers and also through the beekeepers. There are several examples of Depths warping humans into hive minds. Whilst the beekeepers showcase that Depths is still actively dabbling in transformation of humanity well into the Cruel Age, this transformation leaves the original form nothing more than a husk that houses a colony of bees. In this sense, though Depths drives humanity forward both directly and through allowing power to be siphoned by fear and hunger, this is not always a good thing. Perhaps expecting anything good from a primordial concept of fear, darkness, and repulsion is foolish. Through exploring all the symbolism at play here, I'm left with nothing but questions, and honestly, there's probably a lot wrong with what I'm saying, so I'm just going to hand it over to you and let the community figure out what all the bugs mean. It's in your court now. Best of luck to you. Hopefully we can get more fun insect imagery in Fear and Hunger 3. Maybe the enlightened soul of that game can be a bug collector. Maybe we can see what a hive mind humanity will look like, but I guess we'll have to see. So, what did you make of the insects in Fear and Hunger? Do they mean anything, or is this all insane rambling? Either way, I look forward to seeing your own interpretations. I love this series and wanted to explore a part of it I feel is often overlooked in all the coverage of the main storylines and more bombastic elements. There's a lot of insects in these games, and there's a lot of overlap in what they represent, but there's always a chance that this is a complete coincidence and I've reached too hard for meaning. That said, I'd rather reach too hard for something meaningful than find no meaning at all, especially in something as beautiful as this series. Thanks to you, Miro, and thanks to the community that introduced me to this game. See you later.